How to invest in a startup with a Roth IRA. Hey everyone, Adam Bergman here, tax attorney and founder of IRA Financial. Today's video, I'm going to give you some tips on how you potentially be the next Peter Thiel and use your Roth IRA to maybe invest in the next PayPal or Facebook or Palantir. Is it possible? Yeah, of course it's possible. Could it happen to you? Who knows? But I'm going to explain to you the IRS rules you need to know about. So first things first, Roth IRA. Why invest with a Roth IRA? Well, so long as you're over 59 and a half, the Roth's been open at least 5 years, all distributions from Roth IRA are tax-free. In 2022, you can put in $6,000 or $7,000 in a Roth IRA. You can also roll, if you have 401k Roth funds, into a Roth IRA when you leave your job or you're over the age of 59 and a half through your employer plan. How else do you fund a Roth IRA? Conversions. Let's say you have a pre-tax IRA of 100K or 50K and you want to go Roth. Why? Because you think you're going to hit a home run and you want to lock in your tax-free gains. What you do is you do a Roth conversion. There's no income limitations for Roth conversions. You just pay tax on the value you convert. So let's say you have potential to invest in a startup. Maybe, like I said, the next PayPal. You probably want to consider using a Roth IRA. What are a few tips to think about? Number one, you got to know prohibited transaction rules under 4975. That means you cannot invest in a startup that you or any disqualified person are going to own more than 50% of. Okay? So if you're going to own 80% of the business, you should not use your Roth IRA to invest. What happens if you're going to invest your Roth IRA, but you're going to own 20 or 30%? On its face, you should be okay, right? It's under the 50% threshold, which makes the entity not disqualified under 4975E2 the code. However, there's a case I want to share with you called Rollins v. Commissioner. It's a tax court case from about 15 or so years ago. And want to just share it because it gives you some notion about how the IRS could potentially attack a transaction. So in this case, Rollins was an accountant. He owned less than 50% of a bunch of businesses. These businesses needed cash. He took his 401k, lent the money to the businesses, prevailing interest rates. The IRS argued prohibited transaction, and the tax court agreed. Why? Because they said Rollins made the investment not to exclusively benefit his IRA, but to also help him out personally, because but for that loan, maybe his personal investment in these companies would have gone belly up. So again, he was under 50% and the IRS still attacked the transaction. What I'm trying to get at is, even if you're under 50%, you want to be able to show that the investment is being done to exclusively benefit the IRA. However, if you're only going to put in $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 from your Roth IRA into a startup for shares worth maybe a penny, it's hard to argue that $6,000 or $7,000 actually had a material impact on the business, right? So then how else could the IRS attack the transaction? And this is the most common way they can attack it, the second way, called valuation. If they can show that your IRA is paying, or your Roth IRA is paying below market value for the shares, they could attack the transaction. Now, in the case of Peter Thiel and PayPal, his IRA paid for founder shares exactly what all other founders paid, whether they used IRAs or personal funds. It was a startup. The business had no goodwill. There was really no assets in it. It paid exactly what all other founders paid. The IRS was not able to attack it. So if you want to try to mirror those facts, if there's a startup, very little assets, no business operations, no goodwill, you probably can get away with your Roth IRA paying pennies for those shares, so long as it's paying the exact amount as some other founders. So a couple things to consider. What I suggest is make sure your Roth IRA is not the only party buying the shares at that time. Have other people come in too, whether it's friends, family, yourself personally. You want to show everyone is paying the same amount for those shares. That will help you defend against valuation. Number two, get a valuation if you can. If it's a startup and you're raising $1 million and there's really no business activity, clearly the company's only worth $1 million. It gets more complicated if the business has goodwill, operations, assets, inventory. In that case, you really need to get an appraiser. But for startups under 50%, you certainly have a viable option to use a Roth IRA to invest in the shares at par value or a penny, as long, again, as you can show valuation's accurate, you're under the 50%, and the investment is not being done to personally benefit you, you probably will be okay, right? There's no guarantee if you see with the Rollins case. The key is building up a case, good facts to show you're paying fair market value and the transaction's benefiting the Roth IRA and not you personally. Stay under the 50% and you will have good supporting facts to defend a Roth IRA investment into a startup.